Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is a bit of a departure from knitting. It's extremely strange times out there in the world right now, so I thought I would just share a simple, easy tutorial for how to make a 2-layer pleated face mask with a nose wire. I know there are mixed opinions on individuals wearing these out in public, so it's up to you to decide if this is something you want to do, but I know a lot of places are asking individuals to do that. So this could help you to make your own, and the nose wire actually just helps it fit really nicely. It's very easy. It's something almost anybody can do. Again, hopefully this is not something that we have to do forever, but in these weird times it's a helpful thing to know how to make. So I'm going to go and take you through all the steps and hopefully help everybody stay a little bit safer out there. So the first step is to measure and cut your fabric. And all you want to do is measure a 6 by 9 inch rectangle of fabric. So I'm going to try my best to use this piece of scrap because I want to use as much as I can of my little bits and pieces. So let's see, 6 inches. And we can go all the way over to right here. You can use the selvage or not use the selvage of your fabric. It really isn't going to matter all that much in this case. Oh yeah, look at that. 9 inches will take us to right over here. So that was a really bad, not square line, but you can do better than that. So just mark your rectangle and do the same for your quilting cotton. However you can do that with your rotary cutter, with your quilting ruler and rotary cutter. I usually just cut it out. I don't bother marking. If you have a fabric marker, that's very handy. If you don't, you can use chalk, you can use a pencil, use whatever you've got. Once you've got your 2 rectangles of fabric cut out, just put those aside for a minute. You can iron them flat if you like. Then the next thing you need is 2 7-inch pieces of elastic. I've obviously already cut these, but just measure 7 inches for each one and cut them out. And then if you have a regular length pipe cleaner, these are about, what are they, 12 inches? Yeah. So these are 12 inches. I'm cutting them in half to get 2 out of 1 because I'm making a lot of masks. But you can probably go a little bit longer or shorter. I don't think it would make a big difference. So I'm just going to cut it in half and use wire cutters because I don't want to wreck my scissors. I'm sure you could use scissors without a problem. And then I've got 2. You only need 1. You can put the second one aside for a different mask. If you're using a twist tie, grab that, and we'll use that in the next step. So for this next piece, we're going to head over to the sewing machine. So the next step is going to be to start actually sewing this mask. So what you need to do is take your 2 fabrics and put them right sides together. So this is the wrong side facing out of my fabric, and it's kind of hard to tell. I apologize for that. My flannel doesn't have a wrong side, but I put the side that I marked as the wrong side. Put those together as evenly as possible. Now, when we start sewing this, we need to leave a turning hole because it's going to be inside out. So the way I'm doing it is I'm leaving my turning hole on one of these long ends, and I'm leaving about 2 inches. So we're going to start sewing about here. So then the next thing we need to do is grab one of our pieces of elastic, and we're going to be inserting it between the 2 layers of fabric. So you're going to take your piece of elastic. Whoa, hello. You're going to take your piece of elastic and insert it at one of the corners. And you want it on the same, like facing the corner. And then the other one, when we get there, will come around like this. And then when we flip our mask inside out, that's our ear loop. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold my inside back over top. Now, if you're uncomfortable with just holding that there, you can pin it, you can clip it, you can do whatever you need to do. I don't like to use pins because I stab myself a lot, so I'm going to just leave it like that and take it over to the sewing machine. All right, so the only stitch that you need on your machine is a straight stitch. You can see right here I have a few different straight stitches. I actually just learned what number 3 does the other day, and it's now my favorite because it automatically backstitches for you. So I'm going to use that one. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, just any straight stitch will do. And I'm going to change my stitch length. Actually, I'm going to leave it on 2.2. Again, it doesn't really matter. We're not trying to be fancy. So then all you need to do is, I'm using about a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You can just use the edge of the foot. That's my favorite. And we're going to go ahead and sew down to our first corner. I like to start with my needle down. And watch, it's going to automatically backstitch for me, so don't forget to backstitch at the beginning. And when we get to the corner, we need to pivot. If it's been a long time since you took home ec or you've never done this before, that means just stop with your needle in the fabric, lift up your presser foot, and turn the fabric. If you're not exactly at 3/8, it doesn't really matter either. This is not a situation where we're going for extreme accuracy. Oh, so then I'm just doing the same to the other end of the elastic. Make sure it's not folded or twisted when you do this, because then it might be uncomfortable on the ears, but just put it down facing the corner, same as you did the first one, and sew through to the next corner, and then we're going to pivot again. And same deal. Now we need our second piece of elastic, and we're going to do the exact same thing on this end. So this is a nice long straight away. Whoops. This mask is not going to win any beauty contests, but who cares? That's not what it's for. Same thing on this one. Whoops. Put your foot down, don't forget that. And when we get back, whoops, to the first side where we started, remember we need to leave a gap to turn this. So I'm going to sew, leave a 2 or 3 inch gap, and backstitch when you end. And that's that. So we take this off the machine for now, and clip your threads. For this next step, putting in the nose wire, I'm not doing this in any exact manner. All I'm going to do is just fold the mask in half so I can find the center. And this is going to be the top edge. So here is where we've left our opening for turning. And on mine, make sure that if you have a print, it faces up if that's important to you. So this will be the top. Go ahead and just mark the center point with a little bit of foldiness. And then I'm going to take my piece of pipe cleaner and put it on that stitching line that we just made, approximately in the center. Like, center it as best you can. It's not a huge deal. Now, the way I'm doing this is I'm going to stitch back and forth over this with a zigzag stitch. If you do not have a zigzag stitch on your machine, you don't have to do that. I would simply secure it at a couple of points, maybe 2 or 3 points along it, with a long straight stitch. I might just go back and forth a couple of times over it, maybe again in the center and here. Really, we just want to hold it in place. We're going to top stitch around the mask after we turn it, so it's not going to go anywhere, but it's just to kind of hold it in place while we do that. If you're careful with this, it's not going to do any damage to your machine. You do have to be careful not to hit the wire with your needle or you'll break a needle. So that's just an FYI. I also forgot to mention that before we start, we want to just fold these little ends down so that the wire doesn't poke through the mask. So do that now. And then you can watch how I do this. It's not beautiful, but it's functional. So I'm going to go ahead and center that again. And I'm putting this right on the stitching line. You can do it in the seam allowance. either way. I'm going to choose my zigzag, which is number 10, and then I'm using a very wide width because again we're going back and forth over that wire, and we don't want to hit it. And length of 2 is fine. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how I do this. You want to make sure that your wire is staying in the center of your presser foot so that when you are zigzagging over it, you're not hitting it. If you have a cording foot or something else, you can use that. I have found this to be fine. And again, I'm doing these in a hurry, so we're not going for complete beauty here. Sometimes you need to give it just a bit of a pull because the wire is catching on the foot. Okay, and then just go slowly, and so down the length of the pipe cleaner. I didn't backstitch. You don't need to. It's really just to hold it in there while we flip the mask. And then when you get to the end, do be careful because there's now 2 pieces of wire there to avoid. So maybe don't go right to the end. And you can lift that up. And you see we've got a nice wire held in there, nice and secure. So now our next step is going to be to flip our mask inside out. And if you've never done this before, you want to just clip the corners to make a little less bulk when you flip it inside out. I'm not going to trim off. I might trim off right here actually, just to even it up a little bit if your one fabric is huge. But just clip along these diagonals. I'm going to grab my scissors. And just clip. Don't cut your stitching. We don't want to do that. And just clean it up a little if you want. Again, if you wanted to pin your mask, I'm sure you could make this a lot more even, but I don't. And then I'll just trim any spare threads that are hanging off before we flip this inside out. So to turn this thing inside out, or right way out I guess, you just find your turning hole and as delicately as possible, stuff it all through the hole. When you get to the wire, it can sometimes go straight, sometimes you might need to bend it depending on how much you have left. Whoops, I'm off the camera there. It's really not difficult. Just takes a couple of minutes, not even. And then once you've got the elastic out, you can pull it to make sure, A, that it's secure, and B, that you've got all of that fabric flipped out. Do this all the way around. Whoop. There you go. And your wire is in the top edge. So just make sure you've got as much of the fabric pulled out as you can. And at this point, we're going to take it over to the iron. And we're going to iron these 2 flaps down so that they're not trying to run away while we're top stitching. And we're going to iron our pleats into the sides. Okay, so here we are at the iron. It's nice and hot, and I've got it on steam. I don't know if you can see that. Woo! The steam just helps everything really hold its crease. So because we've got our turning hole up here, I've tucked everything in so it lines up as best we can. Then I'm going to just pay special attention to that section and just iron the whole thing flat. Try to avoid your elastic because sometimes it does not care for high heat and we don't want to melt it. Also, do not hold this and put your iron right here with steam on because you will burn yourself. Ask me how I know, because I've done it 100 times. So, that was the top of our mask up here with the wire in it. So, the way I'm doing this, I am not even marking the pleats because honestly, it doesn't really matter all that much, I have found. I'm doing 3 pleats. I'm just grabbing a section like that, about 1/4 inch, and folding it to the top and iron it down. We're going to want three pleats down this thing. So just do your best to make them as even as you can. And then iron the heck out of it. And then for the second one, same thing. To make it a little easier for the sewing machine, I'm trying to make it so that the pleats are not overlapping one another, but rather are butted right up against each other. Because otherwise that's an awful lot of bulk for the sewing machine to go through. It's still a lot of bulk, but that makes it a little easier. And iron. And one more time. You probably could mark this and make them very symmetrical and nice. But again, I was going for speed, not for beauty here, so that's why I'm doing this way. There we go. And once you've done that, I find the mask comes out to somewhere between 2 3/4 to 3 inches. When I take it over to the machine, sometimes it unfolds a little bit and the pleats are a little bit smaller. So that's a rough idea. If it's not exactly that, don't sweat it, because again, I'm finding this doesn't make a whole lot of difference. And then we're going to, you can pin these, by the way. I probably should show you that. Let me just grab my pins. Like I say, I'm not a huge fan of pins because I tend to stab myself, but it's probably better to pin it. So you can just pin it this way. And I have these nice long pins, so they're going to be outside of my presser foot, and I'm sewing this direction against the pleats. I wouldn't put the pins like perpendicular to that, because then you're going to have a hard time removing them. If you don't have long pins, you can just use any pins that you have. Seriously, it'll be fine. You just have to make sure you move them so you don't hit them with your sewing machine. Come on. There we go. And that's why I'm sticking them out so far, so that I don't have to have my presser foot going over the pin. Definitely try not to stab yourself. Oops, I almost did. Okay, and just repeat that for the other side, and then we will head back over to the sewing machine. So the last stage of sewing this mask is arguably the most difficult. All we want to do is top stitch around the whole mask twice. What that will do is really hold those pleats nice and tight. It's going to close up our turning hole, and it's going to make sure that this elastic is not going anywhere, because we don't want it to fall off if we're pulling on it. The one thing to note is that because you have a wire here, you cannot obviously sew over that wire with your sewing machine without breaking your needle. So when we get to this section, just avoid it. For me, I'm doing a fairly small seam allowance when I'm going around to top stitch, maybe like 1/8 of an inch. And then when I get to the wire, I'm just coming down here and going around it with a larger seam allowance, because I don't want to accidentally sew over that. So I'm going to just do that here. You can watch me do it. Hopefully that will answer any questions you have. I'm using white thread because I'm too lazy to change it. If you wanted it to look prettier, you should probably change to matching thread. So I'm going to start at the bottom where my turning hole is, and I line it up with this other line on my foot. I would guess, yeah, it's a little more than 1/8 of an inch. Maybe not. Whoops. I'm also going to take it off a zigzag stitch. Just back to a normal straight stitch with a length that I'm going to do 2.4, a little bit longer, so that it's got a little extra gusto over those pleats. I'm going to go ahead and start stitching. You should backstitch as well, just to make sure everything stays really nice and solid. Pivot when you get to the corners. Now this part with the pins is where you need to go slowly and be careful. So I'm going to sew across to that pleat, Some people sew over their pins. I do not because I've broken a lot of needles. So just remove it as you get close. And you're not pushing or pulling, you're just gently guiding that fabric through because remember, this is a lot of layers. And we're going to pivot again at the corner. Remember, this is our section with the wire, so you have to be extra careful not to hit that. So I'm going to sort of do a funny little turn here. And you can feel the wire too with your fingers to make sure you're well clear. This one's laying nice and straight. I've had a little bendy piece before and it was kind of annoying, but just go carefully until you're well clear of the pipe cleaner. Then go back up closer to your edge. You might have to readjust. Repeat the same process down this side. There you go. Nice and slowly. Do not sew over your pins. Now you see I'm back to the beginning, but I'm actually going to go around a second time just to really hold everything solid. Try and follow your exact stitching line the second time so that it's nice, but I mean, if you don't, you don't. All the way around, and again, second time as well, just be double clear that you're avoiding that pipe cleaner. You might have to readjust your foot a little bit or on some of these pleats to make sure they're not bunching up. And that is it. That's the mask. We're going to clip all of our threads, obviously. And then when you put this on, this nose wire molds to your nose and your cheekbones or cheek parts of your face. And that is going to give you a really good fit. And that's what's going to help the mask be more effective. It's going to stop your glasses fogging up so much, I'm told. And hopefully you don't feel silly wearing it out in public because it's so pretty. So that's really it. It's an easy project even for someone who doesn't sew a lot or someone who may be new to using their sewing machine. It's a very simple project. Even if it doesn't end up looking the most beautiful, you can see I missed my top stitch line a couple places. If I were using matching thread, it wouldn't matter so much. But again, you know, we're not necessarily winning any beauty contests here. It's for a little bit of protection when we're out and about. So if you need help with it or if you get stuck, there's so many different styles of masks on the internet now as well. If you don't like this one, there's others, especially if you're a more confident sewer. Any questions, feel free to hit me up in the comments and I'll do what I can. So that's it. Stay safe out there, everybody.